At this point, exactly 30 years ago.
30. Wow.
I know, I'm feeling very old. Thank you very much. When I started, there was Visual C++, even way back then. And then so the product I was building at the time in 97 is called Visual InterDev. It's our very first web development tool at the time.
Because the web was like this new trend that we needed to respond to. The web was this new
trend. Bill Gates wrote the Internet Manifesto in '96. That was the very first version of Visual Studio. The next major version of Visual Studio, sometimes called Visual Studio.net, that was actually the major effort where we actually embraced .NET.
Gotcha.
It was a rewrite of pretty much every single major product. The entire Visual Studio family into one single IDE, one single consistent experiences. And that is the Visual Studio that people are using today, was entirely rebuilt.
You shipped Visual Studio.net. That's about when I started.
Yeah.
Almost, it'll be 21 years this summer.
It was summer 2001, right?
Summer of 2001. So that was right after the Visual Studio.net shipped for the first time. And I remember starting as a college student and using, seeing IntelliSense just pop up on the code editor. And the idea that you would have statement completion or anything that would guide you to what is the right set of things to type was completely strange to me. In that era, I was used to using the command line to compile my code. It was almost like the expectation was that you had to write perfect code for an hour. And then you would compile and if you were a good dev, then you'd have no compile errors, and it would compile and you'd test the runtime.
I think that you just described a very common experience the first time someone ran into have a full IDE.
How do you think about building the next version of Visual Studio?
So the fundamental culture that we really want to land the team on is customer obsession. We want to be data-driven, and we want to make sure we're shipping high-quality product to our customers all the time. And we want to make sure our product is serving the diverse kind of, customers that we have everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Think about the customer listening feedback system that you and the team actually designed to go build in. I'm super proud of what we accomplished. That was a long journey as well.
Yeah, and kind of really different. I think one of the things that we really worked on with the developer community and the feedback system that we have, where customer feedback goes directly from the people who are using the product to our engineering team, is making sure that that's actionable insights that our engineers can directly act on. We really want our team to have what we call zero distance from our customer base to the engineering and product teams.
And for engineers, when they see the text directly from customer, these are people you can reach and touch, not something abstract. I think that also really builds that customer empathy. You really can feel customers' pain points.
The customer impact that has had is our update time has improved significantly.
Absolutely.
It used to be that updates would take an hour and a half for Visual Studio, and nowadays they're a few minutes at most. And even there's a whole class of updates that we no longer have to do that we used to do constantly.
And I think our capability really helps set ourselves up for the future. Because one of the key things we're seeing is that we used to go do planning, we have 5-year product plans, and now you look back Kubernetes and PyTorch, and those were all things invented in the last 3 years, but they come mainstream immediately.
Right.
And so the pace of the technology changes are so fast.
Right.
And then we really have to be super agile and figure out how we can support our customers with these changes, these new capabilities they're looking for in a very rapid fashion.
Software, I think originally was commonly done a little bit more solo, and it's become much more of a team sport. Yeah, exactly. Something that's much more collaborative than I think it was a decade ago.
When Visual Studio first started 25 years ago, it was very much a Microsoft ecosystem only product. And today our strategy has distinctly pivoted to we want to support any developers, no matter what programming language you're using, and really want to be helpful you to be very successful building any kind of applications, no matter where it's deployed. And I think that any strategy is also reflected not only in what the Visual Studio Big IDE can do, but also in the new members of the family in Visual Studio for Mac and Visual Studio Code.
Right, and I think that part of that is that we recognize that people are not building exclusively with Microsoft Stack anymore. There are components from other vendors that they might have a dependency on. There are components from open source that they might have a dependency on. And so we need to be able to support anything that they want to be able to build their apps with. Development teams are way more geographically distributed than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Visual Studio now supports any developer building any application for any platform from anywhere. Well, Julia, it's been so much fun to work with you over the last 2 decades. I've learned so much from you. And I can only say that I've seen the team and Visual Studio get a lot better under your guidance. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Amanda. It has been so awesome working with you for 21 years. You're just making me feel old.
Those are some pretty cool stories from Julia and Amanda. What'd you think, Mats?
Yeah, I thought it was great, and I really liked the way they talked about connecting with customers. And speaking of which, we got Travis and Jessica here from the UX research team. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Travis Loudermilk. I'm a UX researcher for Developer Division.
And I'm Jessica Rich, and I'm also a researcher in the Developer Division.
Jessica, I want to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the customer-driven program?
Yeah, so I'm so excited to be here to celebrate Visual Studio's 25-year anniversary. And I'd love to tell you more about customer-driven engineering. And it's what we call creating zero distance between our product makers and the people that use our products. And so rather than assume we know what our customers need, we actually test our hypotheses with the customers through customer, product, as well as business development. And you know, Travis and I might be the ones that are standing in the studio today talking about customer-driven, but it's really our whole entire UX research team that's coaching our product makers to make sure that they're making those connections. And they do that through interviews, focus groups, as well as usability studies and site visits.
So back in 2019, we actually got a sneak peek of the labs over in Building 16, but it must have been pretty challenging nowadays to get everybody in the same space together. So how have y'all as a team evolved the customer interviewing process?
Yeah, so certainly the last couple of years has been challenging for our product teams, but where we always remain focused is on our customers and really trying to better connect with them to figure out how they are responding and how their needs are shifting. And so it's been more important now than ever to stay connected. And so I think of certainly products like Microsoft Teams helps our teams stay connected. But I also think of products like LiveShare, which give an opportunity for our customers to share their experiences and their environments right with us over the screen. And so when we look at like the amount of connections that we're having, we're talking to more customers than we ever have before. And also, what Remote provides is the ability to talk to people outside of Redmond. So I think of all the customers that we've been talking to outside of the United States has nearly doubled since the last couple of years.
That's fantastic to hear how you're doing things now. What can we expect from your team going forward?
We're always trying to anticipate where our teams are going to go next. So as we're innovating on our core business, we're actually looking at opportunities in adjacent and transformational markets as well as technologies. So we're always looking for opportunities and signals about where we should invest next.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica and Travis. It was really cool getting that insight into how we do customer research in DevDiv. So speaking of which, one of the biggest pieces of customer feedback that we've gotten over the years has been the desire for a 64-bit version of Visual Studio, which is finally here. So we've got Andrew on the line who's going to share a little bit more about the road that we took to get to that point. You there, Andrew?
Hey, everybody. Happy to be on. Visual Studio 25th anniversary is a big milestone, and I'd love to share this moment with you. I'm a principal software engineer for the Visual Studio platform team and have been for about 15 years. And so I work on the glue code, a lot of the underpinnings that you don't see, and love working on it. Listening to your Visual Studio stories has made me think of my own. Over 25 years ago, before I worked at Microsoft, I was using Visual Basic, InterDev, and C++. And Visual Studio was the first product that brought all those development products together. And I bought that first version, and I've seen how far it's come in the last 25 years. It's absolutely amazing. So I'm happy to be on the show and talk about it with you. So thanks for having me on.
So 64-bit Visual Studio. Andrew, why now?
It's a really exciting transition, one that I've looked forward to for a long time. There were a few things that had to come together at once in order to make this possible. We needed the majority of our customers to actually be on 64-bit operating systems. Right, 32-bit Windows running a 64-bit Visual Studio wouldn't work. And so one key metric had to be that a lot of customers were asking for it, saying that they were ready. They had the RAM. And it doesn't come for free to customers either, quite. A 64-bit Visual Studio takes more memory than a 32-bit Visual Studio, all else being equal. So we had to wait for that trade-off to happen, and we were looking for customers to give us that feedback. Some other things that were holding us back, besides just 32-bit OSs being commonplace and a little bit of memory, is Visual Studio has a lot of managed code in the process. And years ago, the CLR didn't have a JIT that optimized 64-bit code as well as 32-bit code. So Visual Studio would actually get slower in 64-bit. And that's something that has improved as the .NET framework has matured. And so now we actually get much better performance in 64-bit Visual Studio, both because of the JIT and because with more memory, we can do a lot more things without having to flush things to disk all the time.
Yeah, so it sounds like the road to 64-bit was a massive undertaking. So what were some of the challenges that the engineering team went through as they were trying to make it happen?
I'm proud of what Visual Studio can do. So a lot of our customers might be thinking, hey, all I had to do to target 64-bit with my app is just go to platforms, add an x64 target and build, and now I have a 64-bit app. So what took Visual Studio so long? Visual Studio is a massive, massive app. It has code and DLLs that compile from probably hundreds of repositories. And so it's not just one solution. It's thousands of solutions coming together, all having to target 64-bit. There's a lot of managed code, but that didn't get a free ride all the time either. It was certainly it wasn't that much work. But actually, it turns out the native code, if Visual Studio is an all-native app, it probably would have been easier because all of the native code is written quite well to be able to target different ones if you recompile. And C# is too, but when the two come together, because Visual Studio is very much a mixed managed native app, we had dozens of interop assemblies that would define the interface that these would talk to each other with. And the problem was some of these interop assemblies made assumptions that an int32 value was the same length as a pointer, which was fine as long as we were 32-bit. But as soon as we went to 64-bit, that interop layer broke down. And so we had to fix up those. And some of these interops have been around for 15 years or more. And we didn't even have the source code for it anymore. And so we had to do a lot of digging and recreating these interops to give us the freedom to change them in order to make this a stable environment. And the other thing to consider was the impact to customers and specifically the extensions that they will use with Visual Studio, because we have native extensions as well as managed extensions. And so the native extensions just won't work. They'll have to be recompiled, and so that's impactful. And then the managed ones, we did the very best we could when we were fixing up our interop assemblies to make them at least source compatible so that they would just have to recompile against the new interops and go. In a few cases, I think they do actually have to change a little bit of source code, but we always do the best we can with VS Updates to minimize the impact to extensions code.
Yeah, as someone who works on the extensibility team, it was definitely a long road talking with extenders and supporting them in their migration to 64-bit. And yeah, it was definitely a learning experience along the way.
And I had to upgrade probably around 100 extensions, and it all went fine, but it took a while.
Yeah, so we hope that moving forward with the new versions of Visual Studio that come our way in the future, that we're able to make that transition even smoother.
So Andrew, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, and happy anniversary to Visual Studio.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andrew. So 64-bit Visual Studio and pretty much every feature in Visual Studio would not be possible without the awesome engineering team behind it. So I actually got to talk with some of my fellow coworkers and teammates, and they talked about their stories with Visual Studio and all the fond memories they have working on it. So let's take a look.
This is the first team that contributed anything to the current Visual Studio shell. This is the team that transitioned from Blackbird to become Internet Studio, which eventually got the incredible name Visual InterDev.
You think that was a bad name? The name that it was going to be before they called the visual internet was Osmion.
No.
Yes, honestly.
We would get these mountain of CDs and you would put them in one at a time. And that was the installation process.
And I remember they were just in their little plastic sleeve and they were just piled in there.
This is actually a genuine one.
This is actually still shrink wrapped.
I have here a Be a Code Ninja hat. So this one's from 2005.
I found this really old sticker, but this was from VS 2010.
Got one of those. Yeah. It says November 9, 2000, Microsoft.NET.
The first programming class that I took when I was in high school, we were building a WinForm app in Visual Studio. At that point, I've never thought that one day I would be working on the product myself.
I had chosen the launch of 2015 to be my first day, and everyone was in the courtyard having a great time. There's Beth right there. That's me.
Yeah, so when I was an intern and we were just about to do the PDC, which was in the summer that year, where we were going big. We were going to talk about .NET and we were going to reveal and talk about C#. So we wanted to have a demo. I spent a little time today porting that demo to Visual Studio 2022. What it allows you to do is open and view Quake models. It allows you to rotate it. Quake models had the ability to have animations, and it also did texture mapping.
So basically, I started to be interested by programming when I was 12, but I discovered about Visual Studio only when I was 14. Part of my learning of VB.NET and later C# was IntelliSense.
I also learned Visual Basic through IntelliSense, VB.NET through IntelliSense as well. IntelliSense actually changed the way you program, and how you learned, right? I mean, it's pretty pivotal, and Visual Studio, that's where it came from.
I love all the IntelliCode stuff, the whole line completion.
It's almost like with the IntelliCode, it's kind of almost magic.
The IntelliCode and some of those code synthesis tools are also really helpful in the accessibility space. We're starting to get feedback from folks, especially people with dyslexia and things like that, having IntelliCode jump in and make sure all the characters are in the right order. The technology is helpful to a lot of people, but we're getting feedback that's really useful in that space. I'm proud to be a part of it.
It's exciting, can be a part of how the next generation of folks learn how to code using Visual Studio and our services.
To Grace's point, is kind of inviting more developer types into our space. And I think that's a great thing.
To pivot it a little bit, what's everyone excited about with the future of VS or just anything adjacent to VS?
Yeah, I continue to be just incredibly excited by where it's. I think working on IntelliCode, working on the AI assisted space is ridiculously exciting, really, because we're still on that sort of almost vertical climb.
I'm excited about the continued movement towards just basically one model for development, getting away from the idea of I'm a desktop developer, I'm a web developer, I'm a mobile developer.
I'm a nerd for debugging, but the idea of pulling in a memory dump from a completely different OS, dropping it in Visual Studio, understanding the context it was sitting within a different operating system, and then being able to interpret that so that folks understand where they are, I absolutely love that.
Pinnable Properties has a special place in my heart. One of the first projects I ever worked on, and I use it all the time.
I'm a big fan of the personalization features. It makes Visual Studio a lot more flexible for a lot of folks, a lot more inclusive, and a lot of the themes make it possible for folks with disabilities to make Visual Studio their own.
I love the ligatures and being able to have the new font that we've got in there. I like to feel like I'm working in the environment that is mine, and little things like that. I love that.
I'm all about simplicity and helping people understand concepts in a more straightforward way. I think we have achieved that with it's not just the language, it's also the frameworks. So trying to do an ASP.NET application or something like that, it's day and night compared to 5 years ago even.
And that's our goal, right? It's we're trying to make things simpler for people to be able to build out what they have in their head and get it out there. And so anything from the language to our tooling to anything in between needs to be accessible, simple, reliable.
I wish I still had the photo with the guy who has one of our logos tattooed on him, who shows up to every.
There you go.
He'll show anyone. That's the one I remember.
Do you guys see it? There it is.
Oh, wow.
That is customer love. Right?
Yeah. It was so cool to catch up with our former and existing teammates, and especially interesting just to see how Visual Studio and they as developers have grown over time. I know for me, when I was just starting fresh out of college, I was so intimidated by this product, but it was really cool to be able to provide that perspective of being new to Visual Studio and being able to create some new features that help make tools discoverable for hundreds of developers, and it was great to see that kind of impact.
And that's really what's so exciting about being on the Visual Studio team, right? The fact that we can see customers using Visual Studio every day, using the features that we spent months, if not years, designing and developing, whether it's multi-carat support, live share, or IntelliCode. It is really what motivates us and drives us to make Visual Studio better every day.
Absolutely.
And now that we have heard from the Visual Studio team, let's check in with a startup from Arkansas and hear how they're using Visual Studio.
Stopwatch is a high-growth, venture-backed startup specializing in B2B software for enterprise solutions.
Stopwatch is really designed to help big CPGs, consumer packaged goods companies, solve problems in the data and the analytics space.
As a small company, we have to be nimble and we have to use the tools that allow us to be nimble within the ecosystem. We use Visual Studio 2022 at Stopwatch to manage all of our back-end infrastructure and processes. That goes from everything from our entity framework and data model layer all the way up to our web APIs and what we serve our front-end application with.
Being able to integrate into everything from our hosting environments, into our code repositories, into our agile repositories, all from within one tool, it helps us feel bigger than we are. All of the innovations that have come recently with tying everything together to see all of my resources in the cloud from within the IDE. You've got everything at your fingertips. Being able to use LiveShare from a collaboration standpoint is really huge. When you bring new people in, they have to learn the code base. And being able to sit potentially hundreds of miles apart and look at the same piece of code together definitely helps get everyone on the same page.
The IntelliSense features are absolutely faster than ever. That helps us bang out more code and checking for errors, compile time errors, and really helping us, find issues before they make it into the code. As we push code automatically, it's got a great integration with Git and our source control. We're able to keep a very tight iteration loop, get feedback faster, and keep iterating quicker.
I can craft my version of Visual Studio to be able to fit my needs. The extensions that I use help my productivity immensely. Being able to tailor the IDE to my patterns helps me be more efficient whenever I'm writing code. Hot Reload allows you to modify your code, and with one button, you don't have to recompile it. So what Hot Reload allows you to do is react faster. It helps with troubleshooting, helps with debugging. Hot Reload has changed the game when it comes to software development.
.NET enables all of our stack front to back. We have our data access layer built in .NET, our web APIs and web services are built in .NET.
We're using all of the dependency injection functionality within .NET to allow us to write better code, as well as using Entity Framework for connecting to our databases and doing so in a very expedient fashion. You could host it anywhere. So suddenly we did have the ability to host in containers, to be able to continue to host on Windows servers. We could go anywhere, we could do anything because .NET became so portable.
Upgrading to .NET 6 was a no-brainer for us. We always want to be on the latest support.
Stopwatch has the ability to play bigger and up against bigger competition with a team of 20 developers because of the power of Microsoft behind us.
As Visual Studio continues to grow and continues to get releases, we're at 25 years now. I can't wait to see how powerful this tool is when it gets to 50.
That really takes me back to a time when I was in startups using Visual Studio years before ever joining Microsoft. And it's really cool to see that Visual Studio is still able to provide for developers and teams, big and small, everything they need to build whatever comes next.
Yeah, as someone who works on the product, it really brings it all into perspective, getting to see your baby out in the wild and seeing developers use Visual Studio for their real world scenarios. So that's really special. And with that concludes our 25th anniversary Visual Studio Spectacular. Thank y'all so much for watching. We talked a lot about Visual Studio's past, present, and future. And with that, happy birthday, Visual Studio. Here's to 25 more years.
Thanks so much to everyone who's come along to or tuned into our conferences. We can bring the content, but it's you folks who make it feel like a community.
Hey, this is Leslie from the Visual Studio team, giving a special shout out to the extensibility community for 25 years worth of personalized experiences for so many Visual Studio developers.
We just wanted to thank the feedback community, from the bugs that you guys squash to the features you suggest. It really keeps Visual Studio on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you so much, students.
Here's to 25 more years.